one of the things that would make a video that would be entertaining yet thought-provoking would be to talk to you today about police abuse and corruption. Welcome to First Responder Fitness with Carl Wimmer, where armor is forged through mental, spiritual, and physical preparation. Welcome to First Responder Fitness with Carl Wimmer. I am your host, Carl Wimmer, and I am grateful that you have joined me again today for another episode. This episode is going to be controversial, I think. It's going to be edgy. It's going to be one that is potentially going to spark a lot of emotion in a lot of people, and that is not my purpose or my intent. I want to explain where we're going with this video and explain why we're even doing it. Because honestly, at First Responder Fitness, our entire purpose is to support law enforcement and firefighters in their pursuit of physical fitness, mental fitness, and spiritual fitness, and to make sure that not only are they healthy now, but to make sure they're healthy well into the retirement years and they're able to do what they want to do when they retire. We, of course, have morphed a little bit and we've expanded in the physical fitness realm to where we're helping people who are outside of law enforcement, which is fantastic. We're helping a lot of people get healthy, get metabolically healthy, and get mentally and spiritually strong. But on occasion, we like to do these occasional videos. And this sparked from a video I did about a month ago, which was a reaction video to a police pursuit, a fight, and an arrest. And people enjoyed the occasional reaction video. And so this is not a reaction video today. Every once in a while, and I've gotten requests for this because I have a lot of rich history in law enforcement, having been a SWAT team commander, a patrol supervisor, a patrolman, a canine officer, a use of force instructor. I have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. I was sex crimes detective for a long time. And so I have a lot of experience in a lot of areas within law enforcement. And I've gotten a couple requests to, well, tell us some of your stories. Tell us some of the things. And so I thought that of everything that I dealt with in my career, one of the things that would make a video that would be entertaining yet thought-provoking would be to talk to you today about police abuse and corruption. I want to start off by clearly saying, without question, that in my career of nearly a quarter century, the overwhelming, and I mean overwhelming majority of the people I worked with were honorable, hardworking, incredibly incredible, honest, and people with integrity. In fact, if you looked at every person I ever worked with and you compared them to your average corporate workplace, I would put the people I worked with up against anywhere, any of them, as far as honesty, integrity, hardworking, trying to do the right thing. But there is corruption in every particular profession. And it just so happens to be a lot more magnified when there is abuse and corruption within law enforcement. And so I don't hide from it. In fact, it's interesting to me because I am well aware that, whenever there's a sensational news story about police abuse or police corruption on the news, people freak out, citizens freak out, people freak out. And I always kind of laughed at them in my head because I think, okay, you're freaking out. Guess what? You know who gets the most angry when it comes to police corruption, when it comes to police abuse? Good police officers. Honest police officers. You know why? Because every police abusive story, every instance of law enforcement corruption puts you, the good officers, at risk. Because when you're dealing with people who don't trust you, when law enforcement's dealing with people that don't trust them, the citizen is not looking and saying, okay, this is one of the good guys and this is one of the corrupt guys. They look at the tarnished badge, they look at the corruption, and they lump everybody in the same boat. And then, of course, there are those who just hate law enforcement. And if you're one of those, you don't have a friend in me. Okay, because I support law enforcement, I support our police officers, I support our firefighters, and I worked with the greatest men and women you could possibly ever want to work with. People who are willing to lay their lives down for strangers. People who did lay their life down for strangers. People who drove toward the sounds of the gunfire. As Colonel Dave Grossman says, every animal and creature on earth flees. They flee from the sound of gunfire. Humans flee from the sound of gunfire. Police officers race towards it so they can defend and protect you. That is worth honoring, and that is worth respecting. But it is a profession that is larger than any one person. And it is the individuals who are corrupt or who abuse the badge, who bring shame and bring disrespect and disrepute to the entire profession. And, throughout my career, I sat down and I laid out 6 different instances. 6 different instances where I was involved in or where I helped to expose corruption or abuse in my career. And that may seem like a lot, and it seems like a lot to me because I talked to other officers and they never exposed any, they never saw any, or they never dealt with it. And sometimes I think that maybe they did see it, but it is difficult to stand up against corruption, and it is difficult to stand up against abuse in any area of life. I mean, it's not even law enforcement. If you're a teacher and you work in a high school and you see a fellow teacher doing something they shouldn't be doing, but you're close friends, you may not report that. And I don't know. I don't know if what I'm saying is facts or not, but what I do know is that I've had the unfortunate circumstance of being involved in at least 6 instances where I was either sucked into the situation or where I was a whistleblower for police abuse and police corruption. The first situation I want to talk to you about today took place around 2001. And we're going to call this, we'll just call it the adultery case. I was dispatched. I was on patrol late one night, and I was dispatched to go back up another officer at a domestic violence in progress situation. Husband and wife were fighting, and I was clear across town, but I got there kind of quick, but I was still a long ways off. I was surprised that I beat the officer who actually patrols that area to the house. And so I'm sitting there waiting because I'm not going to go into a domestic violence situation by myself. And finally, the other officer arrives. And we, I hop out and I'm, let's go. We need to intervene. I don't know what's happening. You can kind of hear him yelling, and I'm walking towards the house, and the other officer's just kind of hanging back. And I'm just like, come on, let's go. And he was off. When someone's off, he was off that night. Anyway, we go up to the door. We knock on the door. Lady answers the door, and she invites us in. And I say, "Hey, why don't you to my partner?" I say, "Why don't you go talk to the gentleman? I'll talk to her." Fine. We separate them. That's what you do, and you get their stories. Well, I'm sitting there talking to the woman, and I don't get a ton of information before all hell breaks loose. I ask her, okay, what's going on? And she says, well, my husband and I were having a fight because he found out tonight that I'm having an affair. And that's about as far as I got. I got her name and the husband's name. And then all hell broke loose behind me in the living room. And stuff is just, I mean, there's a fight, and it is a fight. It's not a little tussle. It's not an argument. It is a physical fight. MFing and this and that and elbows, and you can just hear. And so I go running around the corner, and the man, the husband, is on top of my partner, and he has his forearm in my partner's throat like this, and he's trying to hit him, but my partner has a hold of his other hand, and he's just pushing into his throat with his forearm, and it really kind of a dangerous situation. So I put the suspect in a carotid chokehold, and I choke him unconscious. It was 2001. They were not outlawed then. And really, they're not really outlawed now. They're just kind of frowned upon. It needs to be a deadly force situation in order to use a rear naked choke is what it was. But it was, I knew how to do it. I have a fighting history. It was easy. Put the gentleman to sleep, quickly started putting him in the recovery position, taking care of him, called for ambulance to come check him out, mellowed out the situation. And again, the chokehold in later years would be moved and elevated to a deadly force situation. And it wasn't in 2001. It was a little more commonly used. Either way, we're trying to make sense of this situation. We call supervisors to the scene. Medical is on scene. And so now it's really chaotic. But somewhere along the line, somebody asks this guy, what happened? Why are you, what's going on? And as loud as he could, he yells out, that SOB is sleeping with my wife. And he points at the other officer that was with me and that he was attacking. Apparently, as soon as the other officer went back to talk to the husband, he read his name badge, and the husband and the wife had a long enough conversation for her to tell him that she was having an affair with one of the officers on duty. Whilst he was on duty, when the husband was at work on graveyards, the officer would stop by for a booty call, and she told her husband the officer's name. So when the officer was there standing in front of him and he read the name badge, he lost his mind and attacked the officer. I felt bad I had choked the guy out. I'm like, man, had I known that, I would have let you get a couple swings in first. I would have let you tee off on him once or twice before I choked you out or pulled you off of him. I felt bad. Officers lost their job over that one. That was a bad situation. That's one where officer was it activated internal affairs investigation, and the officer lost his job, which he should have. Fast forward to about 2004. 2004, I'm working for a different police department, a much larger police department. And by 2004, I was world champion powerlifter. I had won my first world title around 2002, 2003. I was at the pinnacle of my strength, and everything was fine. It was I believe, the summer of 2004. And two of our undercover officers were holding surveillance. Oh, we'll call this, I like to give them all names. We'll call this one the Steroid caper of 2004. These two undercover officers are holding surveillance on this house, and they're watching it down the street, and they're parked in front of another home. And the homeowner can see this car out there, and it doesn't recognize the car, doesn't recognize who's in it, goes walking out in the middle of the night to confront who's in the vehicle, and pulls out a flashlight as he approaches the vehicle. And one of the undercover detectives draws their gun and shoots and kills the man. really a terrible, horrible situation. Horrible. And a whole series of events take place at that point. Investigations on whether it's a good shooting. The officer is put on suspension during the investigation. The family of the of the deceased, they hire a private investigator to gather information in preparation for a lawsuit against the officer and the police department for the shooting. During the investigation, the private investigator discovered that the officer, the detective who shot and killed the man, had been importing steroids in teddy bears into the United States and to his house. Whether he was selling the steroids afterwards or he was using them for himself, I don't know. But he was importing steroids in children's teddy bears. And who do you think immediately became a target of internal affairs investigation, besides the detective that shot the gun? Yours truly. Here I am, the strongest man at the time, the strongest man on the police force, bench pressing well over 500 pounds by this time. And immediately, oh man, this detective is importing steroids and we have the world champion powerlifter working for us. We have a problem. Well, although I was very irritated at this situation, I was super glad that they sent that. First of all, it activated internal affairs. I went through the IA investigation interviews and through all of that. And then I was immediately sent to get a drug test, but not just a drug test for your standard illegal drugs that they do a random tox screen. They were checking for Deca and Trenbolone and Winstrol and Anavar and this and that. Well, I entered competitions that were drug tested. I didn't enter the WPO, World Powerlifting Organization, where those guys are monsters, man, and it's undrug tested. I entered the drug tested Law and Fire Division. And so clearly when the drug test came out, I was completely exonerated without a problem. But this officer's corruption, which he ended up being charged, he ended up losing his job, he ended up facing the consequences just like anyone else would. This officer's immoral behavior, his unethical behavior, sucked me into an investigation that I didn't want to be a part of. But if you fast forward now a few years, about 2007, and we'll call this the case of the evil twins. In 2007, right around 2007, the police department I was working for, the same police department, I had hired a bunch of new people. It was a big police department, so they hired new people all the time. Two of the people that apparently, obviously, went to the police academy together, they were very close friends. And I didn't know them very well because they worked on another side of the city than I worked, a different beat. We didn't interact a bunch. My first on-duty interaction with one of them, anyway, the younger one, we'll call him evil younger twin, was when we were dispatched to a loud party. Every officer knows you get dispatched to a loud party, you show up, and it's like turning the lights on and seeing the cockroaches scatter. People just scatter. Why? Because you got underage drinking. You have drugs being used. You might have some prostitution. You might have strippers. You might just, people scatter. Okay. And it's the best way to break up a party. You don't want to spend all night at a noise disturbance party. So you pull up, people scatter, you deal with the people who are there. You make sure that nobody is dead and you're done. Well, that particular night, one of the people that was running was a very young man, I'll say 18, 19 years old. And he clearly had some kind of, I believe, palsy. because he had double crutches. He had arm crutches that came up his arms and helped him walk. So he really kind of walked on all fours. His feet worked, his legs worked, but he needed these crutches, these double crutches to move. Well, he took off running. Well, he's not going to run real fast. So Evil Twin, the younger, takes off after this kid. And instead of just grabbing him and saying, hey, come on back, which he could have, he blasts this guy, this kid, like a linebacker on a football field. Blasts him so freaking hard. The crutches go flying in the air. One goes into the street, one goes onto the grass, and the kid is done. Just plastered on the sidewalk. And the officer doesn't even cuff him. Turns around, starts laughing at himself, looks at me and chuckles, and then goes about the business. And I was like, what the hell did I just see? And that was my first indication to that officer. I wouldn't get an indication into the other half of these two until a little bit later. But what I found interesting, and you good officers, 99% of you that are watching this, you officers, you'll relate to this. What was interesting is that he used force on this handicapped person. And I'm going to tell you another story here in a bit on another time he used force on an inferior person. But I worked in a beat where there was a bar. It was a well-known bar for island gang members, Polynesian island gang members. Okay. And every Friday or Saturday night, we would get a call there, whether it's a fight, whether it's a shooting, whatever. Always something going down at this bar. So it was in my beat. And so every Friday night, I would drive and park down the street from this bar and just wait for the call to come in. And it would always come in. Fight in progress at such and such lounge. You know what was unique about the twins is that they would always be the last ones to show up to calls like that. They were very, very, very selective as to who they used force against. And that perhaps pisses me off more than anything else, is officers who use excessive force oftentimes pick and choose the times to use excessive force. They would never imagine using excessive force on someone who could kick their ass. They would never think of using excessive force on somebody who they're not physically superior than. If they're dealing with someone who's more physically superior, more physically dominant, someone that could hurt them, they're going to use verbal judo. They're going to use tactics. They're going to use their words. They're going to talk to the person. They're not going to just blast them because they're going to get blasted back. But these two cowards, they wouldn't do that. They would always be the last ones to show up to the fight at the Polynesian bar. Be that as it may. Later that year, 2007, we'll call this the case of the little boy. I was called to back these two officers up on a situation. I can't even remember to this day what the situation is. But by the time I got there, because it was clear across the city, by the time I got there, there was the two evil twins, a third officer, who I'm not even going to nickname him because it wouldn't be kind. We call him the coward. And me. And there is a young, small boy. We'll say he's maybe 13, 12 years old. Just 80 pounds. And what he did, I don't know what he did. I don't know. He's a kid, right? And I got there just as they're handcuffing this boy, and they put him in the backseat of the car. The boy is clearly upset. He's crying. He's upset. They put him in the backseat of one of their cars, and he starts kicking the door of the car. And they yell at him, "Stop that, you effing stop that," and the kid, and of course, any kid gets talked to like that, it makes it worse. So he kicks the door a little more. So the one officer goes up and opens the door. And it was hilarious because the kid slides across the other side. He slides across. So the officer couldn't reach him. So the other officer goes around the other side, opens the door, and shoves him into the arms of the other officer. So let me explain who they are. The younger one who blasted the guy with the double crutches is the one who shoved him across the seat. And it's the older evil twin who grabs him. Okay, fine. The younger one walks around and he has a hold of him. He has a hold of his cuffs. He has his hands up in the air like this. The kid's like practically dangling from, picture that. He's cuffed from behind. And he's kind of dangling. And the kid says, "F you, effing pig," whatever. And so both these guys, one grabs one arm, one grabs the other, and they body slam this guy onto this boy onto the ground. And it's not just a body slam. The kid's 80 pounds, right? So when they grab him, they lift him practically over their head and they throw him on the ground. Head hits, ribs hit, everything. And then they put their feet on top of him. They put one foot on top of him each. The kid has stopped crying by now, and I'm heading over there because by this time I'm thinking, holy hell, they just like brain damaged this child. I head over there because I was busy doing something else on the call. I go over there, and he catches his breath, and he starts crying again. And the younger evil twin, Mr. I'm going to linebacker, a palsy crutch person, starts mocking the boy on the ground. "Oh, you're going to cry, little cry." Just like Scott Farkas on the Christmas Story. "Cry, little baby, cry." And he's making fun of this child. I go over there and say, "Get him up. And I'll put him in the back of my vehicle. I may have said a few words. Get your feet off him. Get him up. I'll put him in my vehicle." Get him, put him in my vehicle, whatever. We de-escalate. Parents come and get the kid. Before we leave, the two officers, they say to me and the coward officer, and they say, and you'll see why he's a coward in a second. They say, "You guys will write up follow-up reports, right?" I said, "Yep, we'll do follow-up reports." "You bet I'm going to do a follow-up report." "You bet I am." So I type up my follow-up to the case. They type up their reports, turn them in. Next day, I get called into the supervisor's office. He says, "Hey, Wimmer, we got a problem." I'm like, "Okay, what?" It's like, "Well, I'm reading this report on this situation, and I have 3 reports." He had 3. He had the 2 officers who beat up the little kid, and he had mine. He didn't have the 4th officer's report yet. But he said, "Your story doesn't match what they're saying." And I said, "What do you mean?" It's like, "Well, they don't even talk about the kid kicking the car door. They don't talk about him being thrown on the ground. They don't talk about any of this stuff. They don't talk about any use of force at all in their reports." I said, "Well, let me tell you something. My report's accurate. My report is spot on accurate. So take that for what it's worth." He's like, "Well, that's an issue." I'm like, "Yep, it is an issue. And it was a hell of an issue when I was there. And I'm glad you caught it because I was going to come talk to you about this situation because it was not a good situation. It was bad." And of course, this sergeant, who's a good guy, but really kind of he retired on duty, I don't think he wanted to deal with it. But he's like, I'm going to make sure I get the 4th report. So he calls in the 4th officer, the coward who was there, and interviews him and asks him what took place. Well, the coward officer, and I hate to say it that way, but you'll understand when I explain. I hate to insult people, but he was an out of place guy. Okay. He was, I don't know how to say it. forgive me, he was what you would call kind of a nerd. Okay. He had big, thick Coke bottle glasses. He was a scrawny, tiny, weaselly kind of a guy who should not have been a police officer. He should not have been an officer. He could help in law enforcement in other ways. You know, there's a lot of good jobs for a lot of smart people in law enforcement that is not a frontline badge gun type of job. He should not have had one. And he wanted to fit in so bad. He wanted to fit in. He was this super religious kid, and he just wanted to be accepted and fit in. And so when he was pulled in by the supervisor, he lied his ass off, and he sided with the other two, which at that point left me by myself, having typed up a report that doesn't match what 3 other police officers said happened. I get pulled into the supervisor's office again. He said, "Do you want to rethink your report?" I said, "That's offensive to me. That's offensive that you would even ask that." And then I cited this to him because I knew it was coming. I want to just read to you this one paragraph from the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics. "I recognize my shield of office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of police service. I will not engage in or condone acts of corruption. I will not take advantage of circumstances for personal gain, and I promise to intervene when met with unjustifiable acts by members of my profession." I, as a person, Carl Wimmer, first responder fitness, I make a lot of mistakes in life. I have made a lot of mistakes in life. But the one thing about me is I take that serious. And I took that serious. That I swore an oath. And I took that very, very serious. That I will intervene when met with any unjustifiable acts by members of the law enforcement profession. And I am not going to second guess my report, because my report is correct and they're lying to cover it up. He's like, "Well, I can't do anything about it. What can I do? There's no video. No. Thank God for body cameras nowadays. That would have exonerated me had I had a body camera to record the whole thing." The last thing I said to my supervisor that night was this. I said, "Look, you have 2 officers, the evil twins, who are abusing the badge. And if you do not," this is what I told him, quote, "if you do not get control of Officer so-and-so and Officer so-and-so, one of them is going to kill somebody unjustifiably. And I did what I could to let it be known, and nothing's being done. They need to be reeled in." Regrettably, about 5, maybe 8 years later, the younger of those 2 officers would shoot and kill a woman. And in the review, the district attorney would rule that the shooting was unjustifiable. The younger of those 2 lost his job, is no longer working as a police officer, and was charged in the shooting. I actually don't know the end result of that particular case, but I do know that I have never been so sorry to be correct. I would end up leaving that police department not long after that, because I would become, for the officers who were shady, I'd become known as a rat. Um, uh, it was getting harder and harder for me to find, on certain nights, find officers who would back me up on calls. The good officers, and there were a lot of them, the majority, they knew what happened and they were on my side and they supported me. But on those rare occasions when it was me working and then a bunch of it was a very cliquish police department, when it was that clique and me, and there was only one night a week that it ended up being that way, I would have a hard time getting backup. It was a rough situation, but I did the right thing. So I ended up leaving that police department. Well, you think I'm done? I'm not done. No. Let's fast forward to recent 2020. In fact, the majority of the reason why I retired when I did, I perhaps would still be working in law enforcement if it weren't for this situation. But I praise God that I'm not in law enforcement anymore, because not only do I love retirement, I'm traveling the world with my family, with my wife, but I'm actually more financially better. I'm more financially well off now, not working in law enforcement, than I was then. So everything is much better. Law enforcement retirement is the best part of law enforcement. In June of 2020, the police department I was working for was going to do firearms training. And mind you, by this time, I had left. I'd had my fill of big departments. So I'm working for a very small police department at this time. In fact, it's a police department that has a chief and then a bunch of lower officers, but nobody in between. And I was a detective. Well, we're at the firearms range, and the chief of police rolls up in his vehicle, stumbles out, says, "Let's start shooting," and he starts the training. And he was completely intoxicated. The man was drunk. And I wanted to confirm that was the situation. So when everybody was kind of distracted, I got into his vehicle. He had a water bottle without a label on it, and I opened it up. I smelled it. It was obviously vodka or rum. It was a clear alcohol that was in his bottle. Clearly intoxicated. And I had a job where I did not interact with the chief very much. And so I did not know that he had an alcohol problem. But as I hear other officers talking about the fact that he's there drunk and that he has this alcohol problem, and it's a long-standing alcohol problem that others knew about, I didn't know anything about it because my job was I rarely interacted with the chief. I did my job as a detective. I did my job as a school resource officer with that department at times, and that was it. And I never saw the officer drunk, the chief drunk like that, but apparently he had a major alcohol problem. And I told the other officers there, I was the most experienced guy there. Matter of fact, I had more years on than the chief as a police officer. And I told the other officers, I am sending the chief home. He is not staying here drunk, not on the firearms range, and he shouldn't have driven here. We're dealing with this. So I got the chief I got him a ride home, and I said, I want to meet with you on Monday. This was on a Saturday or a Sunday. It was Sunday, I think. I want to meet with you tomorrow in your office. And so I meet with him the next day, and I said, you need to turn yourself in. You need to report yourself to peace officer standards and training. You need to turn yourself in for what you did. And he's like, why? I said, because you put all of our careers at risk. I should have arrested you. We should have arrested you. I didn't see you driving. I just know that you arrived in a vehicle and hear that you stumbled out. And then I see you stumbling on the firearms range. And I can smell the alcohol coming from you, dealing with guns, on duty, intoxicated. I should have arrested you, but I'm not, and I didn't. So you need to turn yourself in. You need to report yourself to the city council, to the mayor, and to the peace officer standards and training. This thing goes on and on and on. I reported it. He didn't report himself, so I did. I reported him to the Peace Officer Standards and Training, who opened an investigation. I reported him to the leaders of our jurisdiction, the elected leaders of our jurisdiction, who would go on to keep him employed as my boss for the next 6 months. Here I am, a subordinate, who has a chief who I just reported to the agency that can take his job and his certification. And the people that were supposed to protect me, the mayors and the board members of the police board, kept him on duty, kept him working for the next 6 months. Another report comes in from a citizen who said that they were in a traffic accident. And the chief responded to the traffic accident. He rolled up on the accident and saw that there was a crash there. And he could barely stand up. He was so intoxicated while on duty. This was a couple months after the June incident on the firearms range. I reported that. And what did the leaders of the city and of the police board think? They thought I was positioning for his job. They thought I was positioning for the chief's job, rather than I will not engage or condone acts of corruption. I will not take advantages of circumstances for personal gain, and I promise to intervene when met with any unjustifiable acts by members of my profession. You see, I was surrounded by people who had no moral grounding, who had no moral compass, who didn't believe in the law enforcement code of ethics. And these weren't cops. These were elected officials. Okay. The other officers in the department at the time supported me and supported what was going on. And they couldn't believe that the powers that be kept the chief on that long either. And the reason they kept him on is because he asked them not to fire him until he could get another 6 months in, because then he would be able to get his full pension, or a little bump in his pension. And then in December of 2020, he voluntarily gave up his certification, ending the investigation with the Peace Officer Standards and Training, and riding off into the intoxicated night. Well, they needed a chief of police, so I put in for the job. And in fact, I was the only one that met their qualifications. They listed qualifications. And again, I'm not listing, you don't even know what state I work in. You don't know where I work. I'm not listing any of that. I'm just telling you what happened with me. I put in for the job. The qualifications were 8 years of police experience, 4 of which were supervisor experience, plus a degree in college. A 4-year degree would be preferable. Well, I have a master's degree. I had over 20 years of experience. Half of it was supervisory experience, SWAT team commander, patrol supervisor. And they ended up hiring a kid who had 6 years total experience. I guess they really thought I was positioning for the job. There was a whole lot more to it. There was some religious discrimination. There was a bunch of other different things that took place. They ended up paying me out. There was a lawsuit filed, and they ended up settling. We won't get into that part of it. But what I will say is this. Sadly, the new chief, who I worked with, who I knew, and who I knew was completely unqualified and unprepared to be the chief of police, was recently, within the last year, arrested for stealing heroin from the canine officers of the department. He has a heroin problem. He has a drug problem. And it came out that the chief, who had 6 years experience, who got the chief's job, instead of me getting the job, was arrested for being a drug abuser. Had I gotten the chief's job in 2020, the police department would have advanced. It would have gone places that it could never have possibly imagined. And more importantly, the law enforcement code of ethics would have been seared into the hearts of everyone that works there. People would have stood up against corruption. They would have, quote, intervened when met with any unjustifiable acts by members of their profession. Colonel David Grossman, a hero of mine, the author of On Killing and On Combat, and I believe he's also the author of On Spiritual Warfare and several other books, says this: the public expects police officers to have ethics and integrity. A lack of integrity in even one officer can tarnish the badge for all. The thin blue line stands not just between order and chaos, but between honor and disgrace. I just want to conclude by saying, law enforcement, I love you. I support you. I am here for you. That's why I exist, because I want you to be healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, spiritually healthy. I exist to teach you and train you and see you live a prosperous, thriving, wonderful career and have an amazing retirement. I do not support the 0.5%, and that's what it really is in my career. Less than 1% of the officers I ever worked with were like this that I've talked about. 6 guys. 6 different guys. And I probably worked with thousands of officers. So it's a minute percentage. But when you make a beautiful pan of brownies, a minute percentage of manure really makes it unsavory. I encourage the good officers out there to stand up, to fight, to be honorable, to be the untouchables like Elliot Ness, to be the ones who stand in the gap against corruption, who stand up for honor in our profession, who stand up for integrity for the uniform, and who stand up for valor for the badge. I'm Carl Wimmer, reminding you, be good to yourself, be good to others, and as always, stay safe.